The nurse's voice told me something was wrong before her words did. She came into room 312 at 6:15 in the evening, carrying the particular caution of someone about to say a thing that isn't hers to say. Not a diagnosis, not a change in my medication. The tone of a woman who had been asked to deliver news she found professionally awkward and personally unfair, and had decided to deliver it anyway because the man in the bed deserved to hear it from someone. She stood near the rail of my bed and said, "Mr. Calloway, I want you to know that someone came to see you tonight. Your brother, Walter." I waited. He wasn't allowed back. "There's a note on your chart. Visitors need approval from your emergency contact before they're admitted." She paused, giving the words, "Room to land. Your granddaughter's husband put that note on this morning." I looked at the ceiling of room 312 at Cedar Ridge Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri. A hospital ceiling is its own kind of landscape, flat, blank, made for a man to stare at when he needs to think without anything getting in the way of the thinking. I'd been in that bed for 5 days. Heart surgery. A triple bypass that had gone fine on the table, but left me weak enough in the first 72 hours that I could barely lift a water cup, let alone argue with a hospital policy. That weakness, I understood now, was exactly what Preston had been counting on. "My name is Walter No. Forgive me. My name is Harold Calloway. I'm 71 years old. I spent 38 years running a hardware store on Commercial Street in Springfield, the kind of place where a man learns that most problems in life come down to having the right tool and the patience to use it correctly. I sold nails and lumber and good advice for free, and when my wife Dorothy passed 3 years ago from a heart condition that took her faster than either of us expected, the store was the thing that kept me upright for the first year. Because a man needs somewhere to go in the morning even when the reason he used to go anywhere is gone. Dorothy and I had one daughter, Michelle. She lives in Kansas City now, an hour and a half away, married with 2 kids of her own, and she calls me every Sunday like clockwork. But this story isn't about Michelle. It's about my granddaughter, Michelle's oldest, a young woman named Ashley who I raised almost as much as her own parents did in her early years. Back when Michelle was finishing nursing school and Dorothy and I kept Ashley 3 days a week, I taught that girl to ride a bike in the parking lot of my store on Sunday mornings before it opened. I walked her down the aisle 2 years ago at a wedding where I cried more than I expected to, watching her marry a man named Preston Voss. Preston is not a bad-looking man, and he is not, on the surface, a hard man to like. He's polite. He shakes your hand firmly and looks you in the eye when he does it. He works in commercial insurance, makes good money, and has, since Dorothy died, made a specific point of being present in my life in a way that I mistook, for 2 years, for genuine care. He calls me on my birthday. He shows up at Thanksgiving early to help set the table. He is, by every visible measure, the kind of son-in-law-shaped person a widowed man is supposed to be grateful for. I had surgery on a Tuesday. Ashley was there in the waiting room with Michelle. Preston came too, sat beside her, held her hand, played the part of a concerned family member with the same fluency he brought to everything. By Wednesday evening, when I was still groggy from the anesthesia, and my chest felt like it had been rebuilt with someone else's parts, I remember hearing him at my bedside say, "We're going to make sure he has everything he needs. We. Not Ashley and I. Not your family and I. We," the specific construction of a sentence that folds a person into a decision-making unit they were never actually voted into. I was too sedated that first night to register the weight of it. But the word stayed somewhere in the back of my mind, the way a splinter stays under skin long after you've stopped noticing the spot where it went in. By Thursday, my head had cleared enough to notice that Preston had been at the nurse's station more than anyone else in my family. Not Michelle, who had a 2-hour drive and a full-time job. Not Ashley, who was working double shifts to cover for the time she was taking off to sit with me. Preston. Every day, mid-morning, before either of them arrived, talking to whoever was on duty, establishing himself, in that quiet insurance man way of his, as the responsible party. And on Friday morning, apparently, he used that established position to put a note on my chart that said no one gets into this room without my say-so. Friday evening, my brother Walter turned away at the nurse's station. Friday evening, a nurse named Denise standing at the foot of my bed with the face of someone doing something outside her comfort zone because it was the right thing to do. Friday evening, my phone finally in my hand for the first time in 5 days because Preston had, very casually, suggested on Wednesday that I let him hold on to it and just focus on resting, and I, still fogged from surgery, had agreed. There's something I need to say before I tell you who I called that night. If you're listening to this right now, and you're my age, or close to it, and you know what it feels like to have someone build a cage around you out of material that looks like love casseroles, phone calls, we're taking care of it, then this one's for you. If you've ever been the person in that bed, or the person standing in the hallway being told you need permission to walk through a door that used to always be open to you, stay with me. Hit that subscribe button and tell me down in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight, your city, your state, wherever you're listening from, because I read every single one of them. I promise you that. And if this channel means something to you, hit that like button and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next one. Now let me tell you about that phone call, and about the two people who were sitting in my room when Preston's wife walked back through that door. The first call was to my lawyer. Her name is Rita Aldrich, and she's had an office on College Street in Springfield for almost 30 years. She handled Dorothy's estate when Dorothy passed, and she did it with a kind of steady, no-nonsense competence that made a terrible year slightly more bearable. Since then, she's the person I call when something in my life needs to be put down on paper and made permanent. Rita picked up on the third ring. I told her where I was. I told her about the note on the chart, about Walter getting turned away, about the word we, and about 2 years of watching a pattern build one polite gesture at a time. Rita went quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a sharp professional, confirming that what she's hearing lines up with something she'd already half expected. "Harold," she said, "back in April, when we updated your medical power of attorney, do you remember what we talked about regarding who's actually named on that document?" April. 4 months before the surgery. I'd gone into Rita's office on a Thursday afternoon to handle what I'd called, at the time, just tidying up loose ends. The kind of thing a 71-year-old man who's lost his wife does periodically, to make sure the things he's built are protected properly on paper. "I remember," I said. "The document names Michelle. Specifically Michelle. Not Michelle and Ashley. Not Michelle and Preston. Michelle, individually, as your medical decision maker if you're ever unable to make decisions yourself." "Right. Which means whatever note got put on your chart this morning has no legal standing whatsoever. Ashley's husband is not your proxy. He has no authority to restrict who visits you or to represent himself to that hospital as your decision maker in any capacity." I felt something in my chest that had nothing to do with the surgery. "He doesn't know about the document," I said. "Does Ashley know?" A pause on my end this time. I told her I'd updated some paperwork after her grandmother passed. I don't think I ever said exactly what it named. "Then there's the gap," Rita said. "Ashley may believe the family has authority collectively. Preston's clearly operating on that same assumption that when you say family, it includes him by marriage automatically, the same weight as blood. It doesn't. It never did. Not on that document. And honestly, in that moment lying in that bed, I understood it never should have in my own mind either." "Rita," I said, "how fast can you get down here?" "What room?" 312. "Give me 35 minutes. The second call was to Walter. My brother is 68 years old, 3 years younger than me, and he's been a deacon at Mount Calvary Baptist Church on the east side of Springfield for going on 21 years. He wasn't just my brother that night, he was the man who sat with me in my living room the week after Dorothy's funeral, when the house was full of casserole dishes from people who meant well and empty of the one person all that food was supposed to be comforting me for. He didn't say much that week. He just sat in Dorothy's old recliner across from mine for almost an hour some evenings, present, unhurried, the way only a person who has buried people of his own knows how to be present. Ashley had met Walter maybe 4 times in the 2 years she and Preston had been married. Preston had met him exactly once, at Dorothy's funeral, where he shook Walter's hand and said something appropriately solemn, and never asked about him again. Preston did not know that Walter had been a deacon for 2 decades. Preston did not know that Walter had prayed over me in a hospital room once before, back in 2019 when I had my gallbladder out. Preston knew none of that, because Preston had never once asked. And yet Preston had decided, on his own authority, that Walter needed his permission to sit with his own brother. Walter answered on the first ring, "Harold." His voice had that low, settled quality it's always had, the voice of a man who spent 21 years being the person people call at 3 in the morning when something's happened they don't have words for yet. I told him what the nurse had told me. I told him about the note, about Preston, about the word we, and about 2 years of watching a kind man's son-in-law slowly position himself as the head of a family he'd married sideways into. Walter was quiet, and then he said, "I never left the parking lot." I asked him what he meant. "They turned me away around 5:30, he said. I've been sitting out here since. Wasn't ready to drive home yet. An hour and 45 minutes. My brother, sitting alone in his truck in a hospital parking lot on a Friday evening in August, because some part of him hadn't been willing to accept that he wasn't going to see me. Come on up, I told him. Room 312. Don't stop at the desk. Come straight up. He was in the room in 6 minutes. Walter didn't say anything about the IV pole or the heart monitor or the general diminished state a hospital bed puts a man in. He sat down in the chair by the bed and looked at me the way he's always looked at me, full attention, nothing else competing for it. How are you? He said. Not a question exactly. More like an invitation. Better than I look, I told him. He nodded. Rita's coming? On her way. He glanced at the door, then back at me. I want to ask you something, and I need you to give it to me straight. I told him to go ahead. How long's this been building? I looked at the ceiling for a second. Then I looked at my brother, who'd sat in my living room in silence the week I buried my wife. 2 years, I said, and then I told him everything. Not the quick, efficient version I'd given Rita, timed for legal purposes. The other version, the way you tell something to a person who's known you 50+ years and doesn't need the telling to accomplish anything beyond the telling itself. I told him about the birthday calls and the Thanksgiving setup and the we. I told him about the questions Preston had started asking Michelle about my finances a year back, nothing dramatic, just casual, curious questions about the store's sale value after I'd retired and sold it, about whether Dorothy and I had gotten everything squared away before she passed. Small questions. The kind that don't mean anything on their own but start meaning something when you count how many of them there've been. Walter listened to every bit of it without interrupting, without doing the thing well-meaning people sometimes do, which is reach for the charitable read before they've even heard the whole story. He took the whole picture in. He thought you couldn't push back, Walter finally said. I think so, yes. Because of the surgery. Because you'd be groggy, weak, not paying close attention for a few days. That's my read on it. Walter's jaw worked for a second. Then, in the way he's always had of holding something serious with just a little bit of light around the edges, without ever letting the light diminish how serious it actually was, he said, well, he underestimated the wrong Calloway brothers' timing. We waited together. Rita Aldrich walked into room 312 at 7:52 that evening with her briefcase and the particular walk of a woman who spent 30 years entering rooms where something's gone sideways and knowing exactly how to plant her feet in them. She looked at Walter. He looked at her. Deacon. Rita. They'd crossed paths before, the way people do in a town the size of Springfield, not close, but adjacent, moving in overlapping circles of people who show up for each other during the hard parts of life. She set her briefcase on the rolling tray table, opened it, and looked at me. I called the hospital's patient advocate on my way in, she said. She's coming up. I also spoke with the charge nurse directly. The note's been pulled from your chart, effective immediately. Your visitor list is back to open. Anyone you want in this room can come in without anybody's sign-off. She pulled out a single typed page. This is formal written notice to the hospital that Preston Voss has no medical decision-making authority on your behalf and is not your named proxy. I'm attaching a copy of the actual power of attorney. I'm leaving this with the charge nurse tonight, and I'm sending a copy by certified mail to Preston and Ashley's address first thing tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. Before Preston had any idea, the ground under him had already moved. One more thing, Rita said. I think we should sit down soon and do a broader review of your documents while you're recovering. Not because what we have is bad, because this situation showed me there's a gap between what the paperwork says and what the people around you assume it says. And that gap is exactly where something like tonight happens. I want to close it. Close it, I told her. She made a note, packed her bag back up, and looked at Walter. She doesn't know yet. She'll find out when she walks in, Walter said. Rita sat down in the second chair. Then I'll be here when she does. And we waited. Ashley came back at 8:40. She'd gone home to shower and eat, she told me later, fully expecting the note she'd know that Preston had, with her knowledge or without it. I still wasn't sure that night put on my chart to still be doing exactly what it was designed to do. She walked into room 312 with the easy confidence of someone who believes she knows exactly what she's about to find. She found my brother Walter sitting to the left of my bed. She found Rita Aldrich sitting to the right. She found me sitting upright, awake, and looking directly at the door. I watched it hit her. It took maybe 2 seconds, and it was one of the more complete things I've ever seen on another person's face. Not a gasp, Not a scene. Something quieter and more internal, the specific recalculation of a person who walked into a room expecting one arrangement and found a completely different one waiting for her, and is now, in real time, working out what that difference means. It meant Walter had gotten in, which meant the note was gone, which meant somebody had moved faster than anyone had planned for, which meant her grandfather, the man everyone had assumed would spend this week too weak and too grateful to notice what was happening around him, had noticed everything. 2 seconds. Then she gathered herself. "Grandpa," she said, warm, a little too careful. "I didn't realize you'd have company." Rita spoke before I did. "Mrs. Voss. I'm Rita Aldrich, Harold's attorney. I wanted to catch you while I was here tonight." "A beat. I've left documentation with the charge nurse regarding Harold's medical power of attorney. A copy will arrive at your home tomorrow by mail as well." Ashley looked at Rita, then at me, then at Walter, then back at Rita. The geometry of it. 3 people arranged around a decision she thought she'd already made for everyone. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "There was a procedural issue," Rita said, even and unhurried. "It's been corrected. The documentation I've left clarifies exactly who holds decision-making authority for Harold's care, so there's no confusion about it going forward." No confusion going forward. The phrase sat in the room exactly where it was meant to. Ashley looked at me. "Grandpa, I was only trying to make sure you weren't overwhelmed with visitors while you're recovering." I looked at my granddaughter, the girl I taught to ride a bike in a hardware store parking lot. 2 years of watching something quietly get built around me. 5 days in a bed that had stripped everything else away and left me with a clear enough head to finally see the shape of it. "Ashley," I said, careful, level. "Walter has been my brother for 71 years. He sat with me the week I buried your grandmother. He does not need anyone's approval to sit with me now." She held my eyes. "My medical power of attorney names your mother, Michelle, individually, not Michelle and Preston, not the family in general, Michelle. Rita drew it up back in April, and that is the document that governs my care, not a note on a chart that had no authority behind it to begin with." I paused, let a breath settle. "I'm not telling you this to fight with you. I'm telling you so you understand what happened here, and so it changes what happens next." Another breath. "I know what's been happening these last 2 years. I've watched it build, piece by piece, and I never said anything because there was never a clear enough moment to say it. This morning gave me one. I used it." The room stayed quiet for a moment. "I'd like you to go home," I told her. "Tell Preston I'll call him tomorrow, and I want the 3 of us, you, him, and me, to sit down when I'm out of here and have the conversation that 2 years of small, well-meaning gestures have been putting off." She looked at me for a long time, then at Rita, then at Walter, then she picked up her purse and walked out of room 312. The door swung shut behind her. Walter watched the door for a second, then looked back at me. Something close to a smile, the smallest version of one. 2 years, he said. 2 years, I agreed. He looked up at the ceiling. Dorothy would have had something to say about all this. She would have. Dorothy used to say I took too long deciding things. "You measure twice and cut never, Harold." Usually about something small, a paint color or a fence line, but it applied plenty of places besides. Preston showed up the next morning at 7:20, alone. Ashley had called him the night before after she'd gotten home and told him her version of what happened, and he'd apparently spent half the night lying awake next to her, suspecting there was more to the story than what he'd been told. He asked to come see me himself. I told him to come in the morning, that I'd tell him everything then. He sat in the same chair Walter had sat in the night before. He had a different face on than the one I was used to seeing from him, no handshake firm, look-you-in-the-eye version of himself. Just a man, tired, a little scared of what he was about to hear. "Harold," he said. I told him everything. Not with anger. I didn't have much anger left in me by that point. Just a kind of tired clarity. I told him about 2 years of small individual actions that were each, on their own, easy enough to explain away as thoughtfulness, and how they'd added up into something that used the shape of care without actually being care. I told him about the April document and what it meant, and why I'd gone in to update it when I did a decision, if I'm honest, that some part of me had made without fully knowing why at the time. I told him about the note on my chart, about Walter sitting in that parking lot for almost 2 hours, about Rita in the chair beside my bed. Preston listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat quiet for a long stretch, the kind of quiet a man sits in when he's being asked to look at 2 things he cares about, his wife and her grandfather, from an angle he hadn't let himself look at before. Did you know about the chart note beforehand? I asked him, not accusing him, just asking it straight, the way it needed asking. I put it there, he said. I told Ashley I'd handle the visitor logistics so she wouldn't have to deal with the hospital paperwork on top of everything else. I told myself I was protecting your recovery. He stopped, started again. I didn't think of it as taking anything away from anybody. I thought I was managing a hard week for the family. She's not the one who made that call, I said. You are. I need you to understand that distinction because I think it matters. He nodded slowly. I'm not a bad person, he said, quiet. I didn't say you were, and I hadn't. What I'd been living through for 2 years wasn't cruelty. It was something closer to hunger dressed up as care. A man who liked the feeling of being needed, being the one who handles things, more than he'd ever admit to himself. My father ran 3 car dealerships, Preston said after a moment. He managed everybody. Employees, family, my mother. I used to swear I'd never be like that. He pressed his palms flat against his knees. I think I might be exactly like that, and I don't always notice when I'm doing it. I thought about that for a while. Then you need to start noticing, I said. And Ashley needs you to be the one who figures that out, not because I'm telling you to, but because you're her husband, and a husband who sees clearly is worth more to her than one who's just useful. He looked down at the floor for a long moment. The conversation the 3 of us are going to have, I said. It needs to happen. Soon. It will, he said. I'm not trying to come between you and Ashley, I told him. I'm trying to make sure there's still a family left standing on the other side of this. You understand the difference? He said he did. He left around 8. Not because we were finished talking, but because we'd reached the point where anything else said would have been the wrong medicine for the moment. If you've been with me this far, I want to pause here for a second. Some of you listening tonight know exactly what it is to lie in a bed like that one, supposedly recovering, while something happens around you that requires a whole different kind of strength than recovery does. Some of you have watched a pattern get built across months or years out of moments that were each, taken by themselves, impossible to object to. If that's your story, or it has been, tell me about it down in the comments. Say whatever part of it you're ready to say, and let me know where in the country you're listening from tonight. I read every one of them. I mean that. Hit like, hit subscribe, so these stories keep finding the people who need to hear them. Now let me tell you how the rest of it went. I was discharged from Cedar Ridge on a Wednesday, 8 days total in that building. My cardiologist had me on a walking schedule and a list of restrictions I intended to follow with the same care I'd have given a customer asking me how to properly frame a doorway measured, patient, no shortcuts. Rita came by the house the following week with the updated documents she'd mentioned in the hospital. We sat at my kitchen table for close to 2 hours going through all of it. The medical power of attorney was reconfirmed with Michelle as sole proxy. No ambiguity left in the language, anywhere. A durable financial power of attorney was drawn up with specific triggering conditions spelled out in plain English. A letter of instruction was filed with Cedar Ridge naming exactly who could visit me without restriction under any future hospitalization, and stating flat out that no one could place a visitor limitation on my chart without written authorization from me or from Michelle acting as my named proxy. Every gap closed. Rita slid the documents back into her folder, looked at me across the table, and said something I've turned over in my head more than a few times since. Dorothy would have caught this before it ever got to the hospital, she said. She would have. Dorothy would have been at that nurse's station the moment she caught wind of a note like that, directive in one hand and my phone number in the other, moving with the kind of directness that never needed 2 years of watching a pattern build before she acted on it. She always did move faster than me, I told Rita. You got there, Rita said. The sit-down with Ashley and Preston happened on a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after I got out of the hospital, at their place in the Roundtree neighborhood, at their kitchen table. I'm not going to walk you through the whole conversation, because what got said there belongs to the 3 of us and to the specific, private work of a family trying to find its way back from a place that changed the shape of things permanently. But I'll tell you the outline of it. Ashley said some things I hadn't expected. Not the smooth, reassuring things she'd said in the hospital room, the real ones underneath. She talked about growing up watching her mother and me manage everything for her after her own father left when she was young, how being taken care of, in her mind, had always looked a certain way, and how some part of her had just assumed that was what love looked like when you did it right, handling things before anyone had to ask. She wasn't making excuses. She was trying to explain it, which is a different thing, and I could tell she'd spent real time in those 3 weeks working out the difference. I listened without jumping in to soften it before she'd finished. When she was done, I told her one thing. My house on Baldwin Street is mine. It was Dorothy's, and it's mine, and everyone who's welcome in it is welcome because I've decided so, not because somebody put a note somewhere or managed a schedule or drew a line without asking me first. That's not a threat, and it's not a condition. It's just how the house works, and it's not going to stop working that way. If we could build something on that, I told them, there was plenty worth building. If we couldn't, I needed us to know that now, while there was still enough room between the mistake and any real damage to find our way through it. A long quiet. Then Ashley nodded, not the careful, managed nod I'd gotten used to seeing from her, but the real one. Preston looked at his wife the way a man looks at something he'd hoped for without quite believing it would show up. We had dinner after. Preston grilled. It was a decent meal, not an entirely easy one, the kind of evening where the conversation isn't smooth yet, but it's honest in a way it hadn't been in longer than any of us wanted to admit. I drove home to Baldwin Street that night, sat in the driveway a minute before going in. Dorothy's rose bushes along the side fence were about done for the season. They'd come back in the spring, same as always, out of soil she'd picked and I'd kept tending since she passed, because some habits you keep for exactly the reason that they still connect you to somebody. I went inside, made coffee, sat down at the table where Rita and I had gone through the paperwork 2 weeks before, and looked at the empty chair across from me where Dorothy used to sit some mornings when neither one of us needed to say a word to each other. Denise, the nurse who'd brought me my phone that Friday night in room 312, called a few weeks later to check in, outside of any professional obligation to do so. Asked how I was getting along. Getting there, I told her. She said, you know, most folks in that situation just wait for somebody to come fix it for them. You didn't. I told her I'd spent 38 years running a hardware store, and in that business you learn pretty quick that most problems get solved a lot faster once you stop waiting on somebody else to hand you the right tool. She laughed and said that tracked. The coffee was the right temperature that night, and the house was the right kind of quiet, the kind that belongs to the person sitting inside it. I'm 71 years old. I ran a hardware store on Commercial Street for 38 years. I know the difference between a problem that fixes itself and one that needs a man to reach for his phone and make the call himself. Before you go, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if this story found something in you, because there are more like it here. More room 312S, more notes with no authority behind them, more people who finally asked for their phone back. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, your city, your state, and if some part of this story landed close to home, a pattern you've watched somebody build around you and call it love, say as much of it as you're ready to say. I'll be reading. My name is Harold Calloway. I asked a nurse for my phone, and I already knew exactly who I was going to call.